At my graduation, my father stood up and announced he was cutting me off, adding, "You're not my real daughter anyway," and the room went silent. I didn't cry, I didn't break. I just smiled and walked calmly to the podium. "Since we're sharing DNA secrets," I said, pulling out an envelope. His wife's face went pale before I even opened it. The air turned heavy as every eye locked on me, because what I was about to reveal would destroy everything they thought was hidden. My name is Natalie Richards, and at 22 years old, I believed that walking across the stage at UC Berkeley with honors would be the defining triumph of my life. Instead, that stage became the site of a public execution of my dignity when my father disowned me in front of every peer and professor I respected. He stood there with a mask of frozen disappointment, unaware that I had been holding his darkest, most ruinous secret close to my chest for years. I had spent my life playing the part of the dutiful daughter, but that afternoon, the weight of his betrayal finally broke my silence. With nothing left to lose, I realized that the only thing more powerful than his curated reputation was the truth I was about to unleash. Growing up in the affluent suburbs of Chicago with my father, Matthew, felt like living under a high-powered microscope that never quite clicked into focus. No matter how many gold stars I collected or how high my GPA climbed, the image he saw was always blurry, always lacking the sharpness required to earn his genuine recognition. We lived in a two-story colonial house that looked like a postcard for the American dream. The lawn was manicured to the millimeter, and the windows gleamed with a sterile perfection that mirrored the flawless image my father projected to the world. He commanded our household with the same surgical authority he used to run his financial firm downtown. His voice rarely rose above a calm, chilling level. It didn't need to. A subtle shift in his tone or a cold glance could silence our dinner table faster than a judge's gavel hitting would. As the CFO of a respected firm, Matthew Richards had a very narrow definition of success. To him, life was a series of checkboxes: Harvard Business School, seven-figure bonuses, and the unshakable respect of men who wore the same tailored suits and expensive watches. There was absolutely no room for deviation in the Richards family manual. My mother, Diana, existed almost entirely in his shadow. Over 25 years of marriage, her once vibrant personality had been slowly dimmed until she became a mere reflection of his preferences. She had been an art history major with dreams of curating world-class collections, but instead, she became the curator of my father's social calendar and his impeccable public image. I would only catch glimpses of the woman she used to be when he was away on business trips. She would sneak me to art galleries, her eyes lighting up in the presence of oil and canvas in a way they never did at home. "Your father means well," she would whisper as a mantra, usually after he had treated an A- in calculus like a moral failing. My brothers, James and Tyler, had surrendered to the family path long ago. James, the golden firstborn, was a carbon copy of our father, from his business major at Northwestern to his penchant for crisp shirts and disapproving silences. Tyler had shown brief flashes of spirit, once attempting to turn a study abroad trip in Spain into a gap year, but my father had flown there personally to course-correct his life. Now, they both worked at the firm, two more polished cogs in the Richards machine. I was the outlier from the start. While they spent weekends playing stock market simulators with Dad, I buried myself in books about civil rights and the Supreme Court. The dinner table became a battleground during my high school years. My father would dismiss my idealistic notions while cutting his steak with terrifying precision. "The law is for people who can't cut it in finance," he would say. "It's reactive, not proactive. You wait for problems instead of preventing them." The irony of that statement wouldn't hit me until years later. When college acceptance letters arrived, I had applied to business schools just to appease him, but I secretly applied to top-tier law tracks as well. When the letter from Berkeley arrived with a substantial scholarship, I knew I had to choose myself over his blueprint. The family meeting I called was the hardest thing I had ever done. My hands were trembling under the table, but my voice remained steady as I announced I was heading to California for pre-law. My mother's eyes widened with a terrifying mix of pride and fear. James scoffed, and Tyler looked at his shoes, unable to meet my eyes. My father's reaction was ice-cold calculation. "Berkeley," he said, the words sounding like a bitter poison. "I see." He didn't explode. Instead, he handled it like a bad investment. He told me he had allocated funds for my education based on the expectation of a proper business degree. If I chose this other path, I would do so without a single cent of his support. "You're cutting me off because I want to study law?" I asked, my voice sounding foreign. "I'm reallocating resources where they provide better returns," he corrected. My mother slipped into my room that night while I was frantically researching student loans. "He'll come around," she whispered, though her eyes told a different story. She pressed an envelope containing $5,000 into my hand, money she had secretly saved from her own account. It was the first installment of my independence and the first crack in the unified front my parents had always presented. 2 months later, I left for California with 2 suitcases and a fire in my soul that burned hotter than any approval my father had ever withheld. Berkeley was a revelation. The campus buzzed with an energy that felt like oxygen after years of being smothered. For the first time, I could breathe. But that freedom was expensive. My scholarship covered tuition, but the cost of living in the Bay Area was staggering. My mother's $5,000 vanished into security deposits and textbooks within months. While my old high school friends posted photos of European vacations funded by their parents, I juggled 3 jobs. I worked early morning shifts at a coffee shop, evening hours at the library, and weekends as a research assistant. Many nights I fell asleep at my desk, waking up with the imprint of a textbook on my face. My roommate, Stephanie, became my first real ally, often draping blankets over me when she found me slumped over my notes. Along with Rachel, a fierce environmental advocate, and Marcus, a computer science genius, I built a chosen family. "Blood doesn't define family," Rachel would say when I'd receive a cold, businesslike email from my father asking about my grades. "Actions do." By my junior year, I had secured a prestigious internship at Goldstein and Parker, a firm that specialized in corporate accountability. I worked under Laura Goldstein, investigating the very kind of financial misconduct my father's world was built upon. "You have a unique ability to understand how these corporations think while maintaining a moral compass," Laura told me. "That's rare." By my senior year, I was at the top of my class and had been accepted into Yale Law. I sent formal invitations to my family, mostly out of a lingering sense of duty. 3 weeks before the big day, my mother emailed saying they couldn't make it because my father had an important client meeting. I told myself I was okay with it. I had my friends. I had my success. I didn't need them. But graduation morning changed everything. As I stood in the procession, scanning the crowd, I saw them. 4 rows back. My father was there, looking like a statue in an expensive suit, with my mother and brothers flanking him. My heart leaped. Was this the moment of reconciliation? After the ceremony, where my friends cheered so loudly I could barely hear the dean, I approached my family. My mother hugged me tightly, whispering how proud she was. Tyler was kind, and James was stiffly formal. But my father stood apart, looking at me like I was a balance sheet with concerning numbers. "Congratulations," he said, shaking my hand with the warmth of a stranger. We went to a celebratory lunch with my friends' families, which was an exercise in pure tension. While Marcus's parents spoke with unabashed pride, my father turned every one of my achievements into a critique. He questioned why I chose Yale over Harvard and dismissed my work in corporate accountability as glorified tattling. "The business world requires loyalty," he said. "I think it requires ethics," I shot back. The table went silent, the temperature dropping instantly. To regain control, my father announced he had booked a private family dinner at Laurel Heights, the most expensive restaurant in Berkeley. That dinner was where the final mask slipped. Surrounded by the hushed luxury of polished wood and crystal, my father spent an hour interrogating my choices. He called my career path an idealistic crusade and a waste of potential. Do you know what it looks like to my colleagues? He asked. My daughter becoming a professional antagonist to the world that provided her privileges? I looked him in the eye, the weight of 4 years of struggle fueling my voice. I didn't have privileges, Dad. You cut me off. I worked 3 jobs. I earned this. The air between us was thick with a decade of unspoken resentment, and I could feel the secret I'd been keeping for him beginning to claw its way out. My father's laughter was a short, dismissive sound that cut deeper than any spoken criticism could. You truly believe you did this all yourself, Natalie? He sneered, his voice dropping to that lethal, condescending register he used to end debates. You honestly think the Richards name had nothing to do with your opportunities? Your naivety is exactly why you aren't ready for the real world. You're a child playing at being a revolutionary. Around us, the upscale dining room had grown deathly quiet. The clink of silverware died down as neighboring diners abandoned their own conversations, their eyes darting toward our table, pretending they weren't witnessing a family's total collapse. Dad, please, Tyler tried to intervene, his voice thick with a mix of embarrassment and genuine concern. Maybe we should just take this outside or talk later. But my father didn't even look at him. No, he said sharply, his focus entirely on me. It is time for some honesty. Not only has Natalie chosen to reject everything this family stands for, our values, our legacy, our geographic roots, but she has done so with a staggering lack of gratitude. He leaned back, his eyes like chips of blue ice. Choices have consequences. If you insist on pursuing this path of investigating corporations and undermining the very world that built your life, then you do so completely on your own. Not with my support, not with my connections, and certainly not with my name. The words felt like a physical blow. Are you seriously disowning me at my graduation dinner? I asked, my voice barely audible above the low hum of the restaurant's background music. I am simply clarifying the terms of our relationship moving forward, he replied, as if he were redlining a business contract. You have made it abundantly clear that you don't respect what I've built. So be it. Consider yourself independent in every sense of the word. My mother gasped, a small, broken sound that escaped her lips before she could catch it. Matthew, please stay out of this, Diana, he snapped, silencing her without a second glance. Tyler was the only one who found his voice. You can't be serious, Dad. This is insane. It's her graduation day. My father didn't blink. Which makes it the perfect time to establish clear boundaries. Natalie wanted independence, and now she has it. Completely. The humiliation burned through me like acid. My graduation day, a day I had sacrificed sleep, health, and sanity for, was being systematically dismantled by the man who was supposed to be my biggest advocate. But as the sting of his words settled, something shifted inside me. The fear that had lived in my stomach for 22 years finally evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. I had spent 4 years learning about justice, and I had spent a lifetime carrying a burden that wasn't mine to bear. I straightened my shoulders, looking directly into the eyes of the man who thought he could still control me with threats of exile. If that's how you want to play this, I said, my voice steadier than it had ever been in his presence, then I think it's time everyone heard the real reason I chose corporate accountability law. A flicker of something, uncertainty, perhaps even a flash of genuine fear, crossed my father's face. It was an expression I had never seen on him before. This isn't the place for your theatrics, Natalie, he warned, his voice dropping an octave. You made it the place when you decided to publicly disown me, I replied. You wanted to do this here, in front of everyone. So let's be completely honest for once. My mother reached across the table, her fingers trembling as she touched my arm. Natalie, please. It's okay, Mom, I said gently. I'm not angry anymore. I just think it's time for the truth. I turned back to my father. When I was 17, I was looking for a stapler in your home office, I began. You were in London, and Mom was at a charity luncheon. You always kept your desk so meticulously organized, everything in its perfect place. My father's jaw tightened, but he remained silent. I accidentally knocked over that leather file box you kept locked. Except that day, the latch hadn't caught. The contents spilled everywhere. As I was gathering the papers, I saw financial documents from Westridge Capital Partners. Documents with inconsistencies I didn't understand yet. Invoices for consulting services that didn't exist. Balance sheets with discrepancies in the millions. James shifted uncomfortably, his face flushing. Natalie, whatever you think you found, I found documents detailing settlements with 3 families, I continued, cutting him off. The Morrisons, the Guzmans, and the Taylors. The color began to drain from my father's face. I didn't understand the full scope of it then, but I knew enough to know something was very wrong. I photographed those documents before putting them back. When you saw me suddenly interested in business ethics, you thought it was a phase. I looked at my brothers. Did you ever wonder why Dad was so adamant about keeping me away from corporate law? Why he was so threatened by my interest in financial crimes? You've been investigating me, my father hissed, his typical confidence faltering. I've been understanding you, I countered. I've been learning why you built our family on a lie of perfection. Those 3 families lost nearly everything because of fraudulent investment advice you gave them. You directed them into holdings you knew were failing just so your firm could offload them before the 2008 crash. The restaurant had gone completely silent now. Every ear was tuned to our table. The settlements you paid included non-disclosure agreements to keep them quiet, I said. Mr. Morrison had a heart attack from the stress. The Guzman's daughter had to drop out of college. The Taylors lost their home. My mother's face crumpled as she realized I knew everything. Natalie, please stop, she sobbed. You knew, I said, the realization hitting me like a physical weight. You knew all along. She couldn't meet my eyes. Those settlements, I added, turning back to my father, were paid out just before James and Tyler started college. Their education was funded by the financial destruction of families who trusted you. James stood up abruptly, looking like he wanted to bolt. This is ridiculous. I'm not listening to this. Sit down, my father commanded, and James obeyed automatically, the habit of a lifetime too strong to break. You have no proof, my father whispered. Those were legitimate settlements for investment losses. Standard practice. The documents I found detailed intentional misrepresentation, I replied. It was fraud, Dad. That's why I chose Berkeley. That's why I interned at Goldstein and Parker. And that's why I'm going to Yale to study under the man who wrote the book on prosecuting people like you. My father looked visibly smaller in his chair. You wouldn't, he breathed. I'm not threatening you, I clarified. I'm explaining why I chose my path. I wanted to make sure I never became like you. I stood up, placing my napkin on the table. You asked me to be independent, Dad. I accept those terms. But understand this. My path isn't rebellion. It's redemption. If the Richards name is going to mean anything in the future, it's going to stand for justice, not profit at any cost. I looked at my mother and brothers. I love you, and when you're ready to move forward with the truth, I'll be there. But I'm done with the fiction. I walked out of that restaurant into the cool Berkeley evening, my hands shaking but my steps steady. I didn't look back as I heard my father calling for the check and my mother calling my name. The secret was out, and for the first time in my life, I felt light. Building a future on the truth was going to be hard, but at least I finally knew who I was. 3 months passed in a blur of transition that felt more like a rebirth than a relocation. I moved into a small but sunny apartment in New Haven, situated in an old brick building with character that the sterile suburban homes of my childhood never possessed. It was close enough to the law school that I could walk to my lectures in 10 minutes, yet far enough to feel like a sanctuary separate from the intensity of the campus. For the first time in my life, the space was entirely mine. There were no roommates, no expectations, and most importantly, no looming shadows. I funded this new chapter through a combination of hard-earned scholarships, modest student loans, and a research position I had secured with Professor Harrington before the first day of orientation. My friends from Berkeley had flown out to help me move, turning what could have been a lonely, daunting process into a chaotic adventure. Rachel had decorated my refrigerator with a collection of ridiculous magnets, each one a tiny monument to an inside joke from our 4 years together. Stephanie had spent hours arranging my bookshelves, insisting they be organized by vibes and emotional resonance rather than any recognized cataloging system. Marcus, in his own quiet way of showing he cared, had spent the afternoon installing high-end security features on my laptop and phone. New Haven isn't Berkeley, Rachel had warned me as they prepared to head back to the West Coast. You're going to need new friends who can handle your particular brand of intensity. I'm not intense, I had protested, only for them to laugh in perfect, practiced unison, the kind of synchronicity that only comes from people who know your soul better than you do. The apartment was quiet now, filled only with the scent of fresh coffee and the soft rustle of my constitutional law materials. I was deep in concentration when a knock at the door startled me. It was unusual. I knew almost no one in the city yet. Looking through the peephole, I saw a familiar figure shuffling nervously in the hallway. I pulled the door open, my jaw dropping in genuine surprise. Surprise, Tyler said awkwardly, holding up a leafy plant in a ceramic pot. It's a housewarming gift. The lady at the shop said it's supposedly impossible to kill, which seemed appropriate for someone with your schedule. Tyler, I managed to say, still processing his presence on my doorstep. What are you doing here? How did you even find me? Mom had the address, he admitted, looking a bit sheepish. I should have called first, but I was honestly afraid you might say no if I did. I stepped aside to let him in, noticing the expensive luggage sitting by his feet. Are you staying nearby? I asked. A hotel downtown, he replied, wandering into my living room and nodding at the windows. This is nice, Nat. It's got good light. The small talk felt bizarre and fragile given the explosive nature of our last encounter. We stood in the center of the room in an uncomfortable silence until we both started speaking at the same time. I left the firm, he said, just as I was asking about our parents. We both stopped and laughed, the tension finally breaking. You first, I offered. Tyler set the plant down and sank onto my couch, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in years. I left the firm and I left Chicago, he revealed. I'm actually moving to Boston next week. I accepted a position with an investment advisory group that specializes in ethical investing. I was genuinely impressed. Wow, Ty, that's a massive change. Yeah, well, he shrugged, though his eyes were serious. It turns out working for Dad lost its appeal pretty quickly once I truly understood what I was participating in. You were right about all of it. I sat beside him, my heart swelling with pride for the brother I thought I'd lost to the family machine. How did he take your resignation? I asked. About as well as you'd expect, Tyler said with a sad smile. Accusations of betrayal, reminders of every cent he's ever spent on me, threats about blacklisting me from the industry. The usual Richards family warmth. And Mom? I asked softly. Tyler's expression softened. That's the other news. They're separating. It was Mom who moved out. She's staying with Aunt Patricia for now while she looks for her own place. It's like watching someone wake up from a long, deep sleep. Last week, she even mentioned looking into art classes again. The image of my mother returning to her abandoned passion brought unexpected tears to my eyes. She wanted to call you, Tyler continued, but she's terrified you're still angry with her for not protecting you all those years. I was never angry with Mom, I clarified. Disappointed, maybe. Sad for her, definitely. But not angry. You should tell her that, he suggested. She really needs to hear it. We talked for hours, filling in the holes of the last 3 months. Tyler described the slow-motion implosion of the life we had known. He told me how James had initially sided with our father, fueled by a sense of duty, but had slowly begun asking his own questions as the details of the past emerged. Our father had negotiated a strategic departure from his firm, a quiet exit designed to prevent a formal investigation that might have been triggered by a public scandal. It's like watching a house of cards collapse, Tyler observed. It was always going to happen, I pointed out. Houses of cards aren't meant to be permanent structures. Before Tyler left, he handed me an envelope from our mother. Inside was a check for a substantial amount and a handwritten note, This is from my personal savings, money that is truly mine. I should have supported you from the beginning. This doesn't fix the past, but I hope it helps your future. All my love, Mom." The gesture moved me deeply, not for the money, but for the autonomy it represented. As fall settled over New Haven, the rest of the pieces began to shift. James finally called me, his voice lacking its usual polished confidence. "I'm still processing everything," he admitted. "But I miss my sister." We agreed to take small steps, with no expectations of immediate forgiveness, just honesty. My mother moved into a small apartment in Chicago's Arts District and started therapy, finally discovering who Diana was outside the shadow of Matthew Richards. In my corporate accountability seminar, Professor Harrington kept me after class one afternoon. "You bring a unique perspective to these discussions," she noted. I hesitated, then acknowledged that my family situation was complicated. She nodded with a knowing smile. "The most valuable legal minds often come from complicated backgrounds," she said. "They understand the gray areas where others see only black and white." As for my father, the silence between us remained total. I heard updates, his new consulting gig, his smaller apartment, his refusal to admit he'd done anything wrong. I didn't expect an apology. Some people are simply incapable of that level of self-reflection. But his absence no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like space. During a visit with Rachel, she asked if I regretted exposing him. "No," I said firmly. "But I'm not interested in revenge either. What matters now is moving forward with integrity." Standing up to my father hadn't been an act of rebellion. It had been an act of survival. I had refused to participate in a system built on deception, and the aftermath, though messy and painful, had been necessary. My family was fragmented, but for the first time, we were authentic. I was finally where I belonged, pursuing a path defined by my own values. Real growth rarely follows the smooth paths we envision. Sometimes it requires the courage to dismantle the false structures of the past to build something that is actually true. Family isn't defined by silence and compliance, but by the truth and the respect required to face it. I had finally set down the burden of his secrets, and in doing so, I had finally found my own way home.